Hey, everybody. Welcome to Pianist Academy. I'm Charles Stepanek. Good to see so many of you here this morning or this evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. Hello, C Drive and Alexis and Becky. I've got a question for you, Becky, but I'm glad you're here. OCD King, welcome. And Rob, welcome. I see some of you have been practicing for quite a while today. Very nice. Antonio, welcome. Bethany, hello, Bethany. Nancy, hello, and David. Catherine, welcome. Great to see all of you here. And if you didn't say hello in the chat, please jump in, say hi. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Oh, Alexis, what piece is that you've been procrastinating? Hello, June, and hello, Johan. Welcome. Gosh, yeah. What, Alexis, you said 3 hours you've been practicing. And, Becky, let's come back to Noteworthy. Becky, you had some very famous people over, a week and a half ago? Because of, was it the Hilton Head International Piano Competition? I'm just super curious what it was like. It might be hard to sum it all up in a little chat, but what was it like hanging out with so many fantastic pianists? I believe like Simone Dinnerstein was one. I think she was the head of the jury, right? But gosh, let us know. I've only gotten to do that a few times with a group of pianists like that, and it's always a lot of fun. But yeah, we'd love to hear your perspective. Let's see, Alexis, what are you procrastinating? What piece is it? And Catherine, 1,600 hours in London. Awesome. Thanks for letting us know. Has London and has the UK changed time? The US changed times. We changed our clocks a couple of weeks ago, and I actually have a student in the London area, and we got our times mixed up. But I believe that the time change it comes back together between the countries fairly soon. Maybe this coming weekend. Let's see. Becky, you said, okay, going back about the dinner and hanging out with all of these fantastic pianists. You say it forever changed the way you look at practice. And you made a little cake with a snippet of Mary, Did You Know? Of my arrangement. And none of them could figure it out. That's awesome. That shows just how difficult I guess those little games that I play on my other channel are. By the way, if you since you brought that up, Becky, if you're not subscribed to my other channel is where I post a lot of performances and original compositions and arrangements. And when I remember, which is most of the time, I do a sheet music giveaway of every new piece that I put out. And it's just a little game. I take a snapshot of like a measure, and it's usually one that's buried in the middle of the piece, and I try to make it hard. And whoever can guess the arrangement or can guess the original piece of music based on that one measure that I give you with a couple extra hints gets a free copy. And sometimes I give away like 1 or 2 and sometimes 5. But anyway, all that said, if you're not subscribed to my other channel, there is a link in the description of this video to go and check that out if you're interested. Okay, Noteworthy, that's really cool. And can you expand on how it forever changed how you look at practice? I'd love to hear about that. And Johan, you said 6 p.m. in South Africa. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you had a great Wednesday. Catherine, you said Europe will change next weekend. Perfect. Okay. And then it will be kind of back to our usual for most of the year. That'll be great. And Alexis, you say, I'd rather be grade 8 rock school. And you've been learning it for 2 days? Okay. Rather be. Is that originally a Jess Glynn song, or am I thinking of the wrong one? Let us know. But yeah, I'm glad, Alexis. I think we've talked about some other classical rep, and I'm glad to see, there are a couple other things that you break out into. It's always good. It's good to have a variety of tastes. Oh yeah, the pop one by Clean Bandit. That's the one. Yeah, cool, awesome tune. Okay, let's see what. Let me give Becky a chance to chime in with a couple more thoughts, and then we're going to jump into our little listening. And I've got some Beethoven queued up for us. By the way, hello, Hannah. Hello, I didn't get to say hi to you. Hello. Yeah, Antonio had sent in a question. Antonio's always great about emailing questions ahead of time, so thanks for that. And I know, June, you did that once too, so shout out to June for also emailing ahead of time. It's a way to make sure that I actually see it and it doesn't go by in the stream when we're busy. Antonio asked about two pianists, Andras Schiff and I can't think of her last name now. Antonio, can you put the other pianist in the chat? Actually, let's see. Annie Fisher. I had never heard Annie Fisher play. Thanks, Antonio. And so I thought, well, this will be an interesting opportunity, especially Antonio mentioned one of his favorite recordings of Annie's was of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata. And I thought, well, this would be like, Schiff has recorded probably, I don't know for sure, but probably all of the Beethoven sonatas. And I thought, well, this would be a great opportunity to compare and contrast two pianists. One that's extremely well known and sometimes polarizing, Schiff, and maybe one that isn't as well known, Annie Fisher. And yeah, I'm going to come back to that in a second. But let's jump back to what Becky said about practice. So you said Simone started the same way each of the 3 mornings that she practiced at your place. Slow scales, every key, which sped up quickly, followed by blocked chords, arpeggios, and finally several etudes. Yeah. Lovely. That's a well-formed practice routine right there. Yeah. Great. How long, by the way, did Simone practice when she would sit down? I'm sure you weren't like timing her, but do you have a relative idea? Because that would just be another interesting thing to know. And yes, June, it's absolutely okay to send ahead of time. Yeah. Good morning, Jess. Welcome. Okay. While Becky chimes in with how long Simone was practicing, just because it's always good to hear what other professionals do. And did Simone have a concert at the festival as a part of the competition? Was she playing something? Or was she practicing for an event in the future? Because that can also impact a little bit how much time we're spending. But Becky, while you're writing that, we're going to jump into listening to some Beethoven. So I mentioned the two pianists. We're going to listen to what amounts to the first 2 pages of each of the Pathetique Sonata. So the opening Grave, followed by the first page, probably some 24 or 36 bars of the Allegro that begins the piece. We're going to listen to both of them play the same thing. And maybe not back to back. We'll stop and pause in between and just have a little chat about what we heard, what we liked, maybe what we didn't like, especially if it's an interpretive thing. And then we'll move on to the second pianist and have the same chat and do a little comparison between the two. Oh, Becky, you said she practiced 3 to 4 hours on Friday and Saturday. And then on Sunday, because it was rainy, she stayed 6 hours. And yes, she had a performance. Lovely. Thanks for sharing that, Becky. And Johan, yes, Boris is doing a lot of Beethoven sonatas. I'm assuming that's currently. Yes. Very nice. Are you going to have I think you said you're tuning in from South Africa. Are you going to have a chance to get to hear any of them? Or are they being live streamed? Let us know. Okay, we're going to start with Annie Fisher playing the opening of this Beethoven sonata. And I don't know, I pulled this video as the I think it was the only one I could find of her playing this piece on YouTube. But just so you all know, the video starts with this gentleman sitting in a big leather armchair. So I don't know what show this got pulled from, but after about 20 seconds, it's just her playing. So anyway, just don't mind the gentleman in the in the video that I'm about to show. Okay. Okay. I feel like we should give her a round of applause, like we usually do here. Reactions about that performance. Anything. How many of you have any of you here played the piece before? The Pathétique, whether the whole thing or just the first movement? A lot of people will study the first movement before they study the entire piece of music, or even the second middle movement. Yeah, Bethany, I will totally agree with your comment there, and it was very noticeable. Bethany said she really used the weight of her arm. Yeah. Antonio had the pleasure of hearing her live, and you say her live sound was stunningly beautiful. Yeah. Alexis, you said you tried to you tried the first few pages to humble yourself and decided to postpone it. Okay. That's good. That's good. A challenge piece is always good for us, though. C Drive. Okay, a little data here. Annie Fisher is number 14 on Caleb Hu's list of the 50 greatest classical pianists of the 20th century. Wonderful. Dith, you said you had the second movement played as one of the preludes before your wedding. Very nice. Great memory. Any more about the performance? Did you like it? Did you like the sense of timing? Did you like the interpretation? Any other thoughts about the tone? Even though it's an older recording, we can still talk a little bit about the tone. So Bethany, you said you thought her runs were super clean. They were super clean. Yeah. And you said not heavy-footed with pedal. Also very true. Antonio, you've probably listened to this. I'm assuming you've heard this recording. I'm just curious your thoughts, especially because you like her playing a lot. Well, Alexis, you like how she's loud without bashing the piano. So yeah, very warm tone. And I think the thing that Bethany brought up to begin with, the fact that she's playing with a lot of arm and not as much, not all the time, as much finger or wrist action. And you could really see that when she played and the wrist was really low and she just fell into and landed on different notes like that. It was a really big tone without ever being, harsh. Becky, you say, wow, clean, crisp, lovely passage work. Johann, strong entrance and perhaps a bit slower than what you're used to in the Allegro, I'm assuming, Johann. Okay. Are you talking about the Allegro or the Grave? And Antonio, you say you have several of her recordings on CD and you have a soft spot for her. Cool. I'll give a few of my thoughts, and we can continue to have a discussion, and then we'll jump into Schiff's playing of the same. I feel like her tone is very powerful, and that was the first thing that struck me when I was listening. Was that with seemingly little effort, there was a big sound. And that was really nice to hear. And that still came across, even on an older recording, that there was just this mass of sound. I like her opening quite a lot, with the exception of a couple things. And this is purely interpretive. I like to hear some of these runs. I like to hear them a little more romantic and less notey and actually less clean, because to me that super clean sound sounds like earlier classical music. Whereas I might like something like that for that first run. Her last run before the Allegro begins, this chromatic thing, there was no pedal at all, I don't think. And there was no rubato at all. It was just straight to the point. I've not heard someone play it like that. So I'm still on the fence about how much I like it. Granted, the score, and I'm going to show the score in a minute here, the score does not have any tempo change markings. Quite a few people do something there. But it was very interesting to hear just a very pure interpretation, I'll call it. Pure yet still powerful. Oh, and, oh my gosh, the contrast between this soft motif and then where fortissimo kicks in was so huge and massive. I loved that. That was all about the Grave. The Allegro, let's see. Johann, I still haven't heard if you if you feel like the Allegro is slower than what you're used to. I think she was playing the Allegro around 150 some, like 155 beats per minute. Dun, 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 dun. which is very quick. It's not as quick as you'll hear some people play it today, but I do think it's on the quicker side for that allegro. And to put a little reference point on that, Czerny wrote, that the allegro of this piece should be, from his time studying with Beethoven, 144, if we trust the metronome of the period, which would be just a hair slower. That's about 144. So a hair slower. But still, gosh, she played with such control through all of that. And just really, sparkling playing. And everything stayed nice and crisp. Antonio, you say you always thought she reminded you a bit of Michelangelo. Yeah, I can see that. Especially interpretively too. Sticking more to a pure interpretation of the score. Yeah. Becky, you say you like 144 better, but she was powerful with grace. Yeah. Johan, you say it was a general feeling and not specific. You like the crispness and the clean sound. Might be because of the older recording. Maybe. Let's contrast that with Schiff playing the same excerpt. I don't have a video of Schiff playing, and so I'm just going to show the sheet music to the score while we listen to his performance. And let me cue that up. Okay, let's see. My score turned off. There it is. Okay, so we're going to watch the score, and here is Schiff playing the same excerpt. Okay. Let's have some thoughts about that performance. We could start with what we like and what we dislike. We could go, and then we could move from there and talk a little bit about what are the differences between the two that we heard. I'll start us off by saying I was actually surprised how much I like it because I typically like Schiff's playing a lot in Bach, and I'm typically not drawn to it from many other composers. But that said, I found this to be a very, very convincing and lovely performance, at least at the opening of the piece. June, you started us off by saying it seems more melodic to you. Yeah. Yeah, because there was more rubato, especially in the opening, the grave, because there was more time taken and there was a little bit more easing into things and easing out of things. Yeah, I agree with that. Becky, you say you love his tempo. It sounded so romantical and theatric, and love his rubato. But bringing up tempo and going back to what we just listened to in Annie's performance and comparing these two, Schiff's tempo is a bit faster. Maybe 10 beats per minute faster, like 160 to 165, and Annie's was about 155. Antonio, you say your problem with Sir Andras is, in general is his tendency to embellish unnecessarily most passages, which you find distracting to the point of irritation. Antonio, did you hear any of those things that you dislike in this particular performance? I'm just curious. And Alexis, you say you think you prefer Schiff's interpretation, though you liked the softer moments in Annie Fisher's interpretation. Bethany, you say you like how he came out of that first run quietly. Yeah, very, very different interpretation of the runs on the opening page. Very different. David, you like it with the rubato. Catherine, the changes in dynamics were softer and, you say, better introduced. They weren't as abrupt. Yeah? Nancy, you say you like the Schiff too, but it might be the recording. And it sounds right to you. Got it. Yeah. It's always nice too. I believe this recording that I just played is from about 2006. So it's a very new recording. And obviously very clean recording as well. So you really get to hear all the detail in the sound. Interesting. So for all of you here, if you were to go back and choose to listen to one for your enjoyment of the piece, without jumping to any conclusions based on what I just read, whose would you choose? I don't think that necessarily means that one is better than the other, by the way. It's just a matter of personal taste. Let's see. Antonio, you said, so not too much. Well, I asked Antonio about if you heard those irritating liberties, and you said not too much. To be totally honest, you began listening to Schiff many years ago, and you think that was more prominent in his early recordings. But his style lacks poignancy for you. Okay. So Alexis, you picked Annie Fisher's to listen to. Noteworthy, picked Schiff. June picked Schiff. Iraqi Super, welcome, by the way. You picked Schiff. Okay, David picked Schiff. Overwhelmingly, Schiff is winning. Catherine, Schiff, probably because it feels more familiar. Yeah. Johan, you say there's too much reverb in the recording and you prefer not as much rubato. So you'll choose Annie's, but your preferred Beethoven's is Richard Good. Well, yes, Richard Good is wonderful with the Beethoven sonatas. Yeah, and I would actually say Annie's probably it's Richard Good doesn't play like Annie Fisher, but his interpretation would lean more in that direction than what we just heard from Schiff. In Bethany, you choose Andras Schiff because you thought he had a better sense of phrase, and it made you hang on your seat to hear what's next. Yeah. Nancy asked, are there Fisher recordings on CD? Antonio, you'd be great to answer that question. And Alexis, you say you prefer to listen to Fisher because it's less familiar, so there's more to learn, since there's less you're already biased to. It's, yeah. Gosh, so many great comments. Lovely. Let's go back and talk through a little bit more technically, maybe, a little bit of what Schiff did. The opening bar, which I don't think I've heard any other pianist do this, but the opening bar is marked forte piano. Actually, each of these three statements, bar 1, and then bar 2, and bar 3, right? Those are all marked forte piano. And Schiff, if you listen really closely, you could go back and listen again afterward. He uses the damper pedal to create the piano dynamic more quickly. And I'm not even sure if I can do that, but let's try. Maybe that some of that came across, but there was just a little softening. Let me try it again, doing a little more. That was too much. That's a hard thing to do, but he was cutting the resonance out of the first bar and each forte piano that followed to make that change in dynamic bigger than if we just play and let the piano ring with the pedal down. Now, I don't know if I would ever teach the piece that way. I understand why he's doing it, and it's because of the marking, and perhaps that's a way of imitating Beethoven's instrument a little bit more on our modern piano. Beethoven's piano wouldn't have the same resonance, and it wouldn't have the same amount of sustain that we have today. That's also how many of you heard Schiff talk about the first movement of the Moonlight Sonata? There's a whole lecture. He did a lecture series, I think, on actually all of the sonatas. Have any of you heard his lecture on the first movement of Moonlight Sonata? Of course, oops. We know the piece. I don't know if I have. I do have the piece somewhere on here. It'll take me a minute to find, but he recommends playing the opening of the Moonlight Sonata with damper pedal down, maybe even the entire movement with damper pedal down the whole time, not changing, because of the marking, which I believe the marking in the score is senza sordino, which is without the mutes. And the mutes would have been, in this case, the mutes would have been the dampers on the strings. So his interpretation of that is that you should never allow the dampers to touch the strings ever in the entire performance of the piece. Which, again, I think it may have really been an interesting effect on Beethoven's instrument. And on our modern instrument, it gets blurry real quickly. And I don't think that's what Beethoven really wanted. And maybe what Schiff is saying in there is, find something that's in between the really clean pedaling. He's trying to push the boundary in the opposite direction that how everybody plays it, because everybody plays it so cleanly. And maybe saying, you know what, that's not what Beethoven wrote, and we should think about it differently. Going back to this piece, though, he used the damper pedal to try to imitate that lack of sustain by clipping a little bit, and a little bit again, maybe, to bring the volume down. Now, unfortunately, what happens is where the damper pedal works, when you go back and listen to the recording, you know what, I'll just play it again since we're talking about it. It's right at the beginning. I'm not going to put the sheet music up this time, but I'm going to try to point out where I hear it happen. Hold on a second. Let's see if it works this time. It's a little too soft on my end to be able to point out where that cutting of the pedal is happening. But now that I pointed that out, did you hear some of that? And did you hear a little bit of how the pedal would go and just kind of scoop away some of that resonance, probably 2 or 3 times on each of those chords? That's an interesting thing. I don't love it because it creates these kind of jagged edges in the resonance that we have, but I think that was really an interesting thing to hear from him. Like we already talked about, the runs that Schiff plays are much more romanticized, which is how I like to hear the piece. So maybe I'm also biased because that's the kind of interpretation that I gravitate toward. But it was really refreshing to hear Annie's playing of them very, very crisply and exactly how they're marked on the page. Going into the next part of the Grave, I thought that this was beautiful from Schiff. But I feel like he lost some of the contrast between these moments, the moments that are piano, and Beethoven marks fortissimo on the first note, not on the chord, not on the big chord with both hands, like there. He marks it over here. And I feel like Schiff kind of does something that's more like a crescendo, where the first note is forte. Like this. And then he'll repeat that each time. And that's beautiful. But I do think that Beethoven wanted really powerful contrasts between this major and very lyric melody and this, which is all diminished and minor and diminished, really dissonant chords, which then fall back into B flat major 7. And then we get a little fully diminished 7 chord there. But I think there are great opportunities in that to show those huge contrasts. And he kind of skimmed over them a little bit, or alluded to them a little quickly, a little early in the phrase. And so I think it lost a little bit of impact, but it's really beautiful. And then, of course, on the next page, the Allegro, he plays even more quickly. 165. That's a very quick tempo. Yet it was still pretty clean, not quite as clean as Annie's. Where it was really clean was here. He played those runs, I think, with no pedal at all, which is interesting. I'd probably use a little bit myself, but that's some of the beautiful things about interpretation. I think there's a lot of different ways things can go. This was a fun thing to do. So, Antonio, to kind of answer your question, which was talking a little bit about these two pianists, if Fischer's interpretations of other works is like what we just heard in this Beethoven, I think they'd be really refreshing, just because they are more straightforward, and yeah. I feel like we live in a time where the recordings that exist, I mean, first of all, we have access to anything and everything that we can go listen to. But many times, in order to make some sort of a statement, new artists need to put their own swing on things. They need to put their own spin on it and make it their own piece. And sometimes in doing that, I wonder if some choices that get made are because they're different and not because they're truly felt by the artist that way, but because it's a way to make their performance stand out. I would need to ask some people truly about that, if they really believe in that or if they made a stylistic choice on purpose just to be a little different. Yeah. But I thought this comparison was a lot of fun. So going back through a couple comments. Let's see. Noteworthy, Becky, you say Fisher and Schiff's music is all on Spotify. That's great. Very easy to listen to then. Yeah. Cool. I hope yeah. Let me know if you enjoyed doing this kind of thing, because even if there isn't a question from Antonio, from anybody about something like this, we could always do part of a live stream devoted to this, where we maybe listen to a short excerpt of a piece by two really famous pianists, especially if they're different, and listen for those differences and discuss. That would be a lot of fun. I'd have a lot of fun doing it. Hello, Newtboy37. I'm going to come back to your question in a second. So, yeah. Becky, sounds like that's a positive. Bethany, you said yes. And Antonio, you said this reminds you how huge the difference is between what you hear on a recording and what you hear live. I have a story about that. And I told one of my students, I can't remember who it was, but one of my favorite teachers that I studied with was Alexander Corsantia, and he's still on faculty at the New England Conservatory of Music. And let's see, the big piece that I was studying with him was Stravinsky's Firebird Suite, which I haven't played in 15 years now. But he gave this performance of Mussorgsky's Pictures at an exhibition. That was just like the most mind-blowing, jaw-dropping performance of that piece I had ever heard. I may have even heard the performance before I had a chance to study with him. It was just so powerful and so full of color. And the tone that he got out of the instrument was huge. I was 30 rows back, and it was like I was sitting on stage with him. It was amazing in every possible way. And the hall where he was playing that made a recording of the evening. They made a recording of the event. And must be a year or 2 years later, when I got to study with him, I asked him, hey, do you have a copy of when you played that recital in that hall? A week later, he brought me a CD, and he said, here you go. I found it. And yeah, enjoy. And so he gave me a copy of that performance. And I listened to it with these incredibly high expectations because I wanted to relive that moment. And it sounded so bland on the recording. The recording didn't capture any of the magic of what happened in those 30 minutes in the performance. It was just like, And now I'm left with, I have this recording of this wonderful memory I have, and I never listened to it because the memory is so strong in one regard and the recording is so opposite. But to Antonio's point, yes, the live experience is just, it can be incredible, and recordings don't always live up to that. Another thing, coming from a professional that makes recordings, the way we play live in a hall and the way we play on a recording, if we're purposely making a recording, tend to be a little different too. There's a difference when you're playing live, depending on the size of hall you're playing. There's a difference in maybe the response you have gotten from the audience and the energy you put in versus what you don't. There's a difference in the risks you take. And ironically, some really magical live performances, the performers take more risks and they do more that, they might not want to release a recording for all perpetuity that has those risks on it. But in the moment, they sound so amazing. But if you heard that, and that was like you ascribed that interpretation to that artist, when maybe every night they perform, it's a little different, and the risks aren't the same. That's why sometimes the choices that get made for an album version are different, and they're sometimes less risky than what happens live. Oh, yeah, okay. So I'm going back through the chat. That was just, yeah. I had to share that story because of Antonio's comment. So it sounds like we're going to definitely do this again, which is cool. And Alexis, you bring up a great one. The difference between Pogorelich and Deng Tai Sun's interpretation of one of the Chopin preludes. I'm going to actually write that down. I don't know if we'll do it next time. But I definitely don't know Deng Tai Sun's recording of Chopin preludes. So that'll be fun for me to check out. Okay. Got that. Yes. So Johan, you say recordings never sound as good as live, but yeah, sound equipment plays a big role. Yes. And yeah, not only what it was recorded with, but what you have to listen back with. That also has a huge impact. Nancy, there's a difference in you as a listener in a live audience too. That is absolutely true. Yes, and Antonio, yeah, you said the live audience responds to the player and the player to the audience. Absolutely, all those are true. And if, yeah, even listening to a live recording, if you weren't there to feel the energy in the room, it might not make sense why certain things happened the way they did, or it might not make as much sense. Oh, okay. Well, we will come back to this kind of stuff in the future. Great. Love it. Awesome. Okay. The rest of the time, two things. One, I think most of the rest of this time can be open to questions about pretty much anything, and I'm going to jump back to Newt Boy's question in a second. I did get a video from Zero, who is here once in a while, and if Zero happens to tune in, I don't know if he's going to be able to make it, but we might take a quick listen to his work on a Chopin etude if he shows up. And then we'll just kind of skip around and go from there. At B. Booker, welcome. I'm going to jump back to Newt Boy's question, and then we'll just go through as these have come in. So thanks for B. Booker. Thanks for dropping that question in. And Becky, yeah, I'll come back to those in a second. Okay, so Newt Boy had said, Charles, general music learning question. Do you think it's okay to learn a piece at constant dynamic level and then work on the dynamics after you get it up to tempo? Two answers. If you're an early beginner, yes. And I mean early beginner, like you're working through method books, you're working in like early method books. You might be working things that are mostly in 5-finger position, mostly have some triad-based chords, maybe an inversion once in a while. You know, your usual like those kinds of things. If you're at that level, yes, I'm a fan of kind of pulling apart the components of music and saying, we can only think about so much. Let's get the notes right. Let's get the rhythms right. We'll play it at one dynamic to start with, and then we'll work on adding those dynamics in, because that's a really big layer of complexity to add for an early beginner. The more advanced you become, the less I'm in favor of that. Because even from, let's say, early intermediate to mid-intermediate level, even as early as that, I really stress with my students that we should always have an ear out for what we want the phrases to sound like and what we're trying to say with the piece of music, even while we're learning the notes. And there might be reasons to drill things once in a while, and there might be reasons to use a whole variety of practice techniques like groupings, or there's a whole slew, right? And in those instances, we might say, there's a technical reason that is superseding everything else, and we have to focus 100% on that, and we have to do that for a number of repetitions. But it shouldn't be, even in that case, it shouldn't be day after day after day after day after day. It should be, okay, do a few, and then go back and put it in the context of the piece so that we're really hearing the music. We're really working on music and not working on executing something at the right time in the right way. But we're working on making music instead. So in general, it depends a little bit on your level, but I'd say for most, except for the earliest of beginners, it's really important to work dynamics in. And we could take this kind of theory and expand it out even further. So the more advanced you become, the earlier, not only do you incorporate dynamics, but you incorporate all of the articulations that are marked on the page, the slurs that are marked on the page. And we do those as close to the first read through the piece as possible. The primary purpose is that we want to spend as little time doing something we don't intend to as we learn something, because we're programming all sorts of information for our mind and for our body, and we want to do it in a way that's cohesive. Yeah. So, Newt Boy, feel free, if you have a follow-up question to that, drop it in the chat and we'll come back to it. But that's a great question to kick us off. Okay, B. Booker, your question was, do you favor developing your own interpretation while learning before you dive into exploring other artists' ideas? That's another great question, and it's also really level dependent. So I'd say for most students, until you reach a really advanced level, it's important to listen to at least one recording at the beginning of learning something. Maybe preferable, if you're going to do multiple listens, listen to a couple different artists play, because we don't want to get stuck mimicking one artist, maybe unintentionally mimicking them, but because if we fill our ears with too much of the same sense of phrase and rubato and all that, that can distort how we learn what's actually on the page, and it ends up distorting our interpretation as well. For most people, let's say until you are purposefully trying to make a statement of your own, if you're trying to develop your own sense of what the art is at the instrument, and you feel like you have enough background to be able to do that, like historical context, for example, like in Bach and Beethoven and Chopin and Liszt and Rachmaninoff, whatever the composer is you're working on, that you've experienced enough of their music, you've worked on enough of the music, you have worked with great teachers, preferably plural, on enough of that music that you have been influenced by a really broad range of approaches. Then I think it's really important that you don't listen to anything. And from the first read of a piece, of course, if they're popular pieces of music or some of the great works, we're going to have heard them before, but it won't be so front and center in our memory. So for those, in those instances, I would say don't listen to a piece first. Dive in and start to make the music your own right from the very beginning. And it's going to be a totally different experience, because there is no rubato and there's no playing with the phrase that's going to shift how you interpret something. It's purely taking the information on the page and processing it yourself. And the result you get is going to be most you and not influenced by someone else. Now, that's not that many students. That's really, really high level, probably beyond 1 degree, maybe even 2 degrees in piano before you're going to really do that. So that doesn't happen very often. So for everybody else, I think it's important as you play a piece of music, and I'm going to see if I can give an example of this. It's important as you play a piece of music to continue to listen to a variety of artists play it. And even if you have one favorite, don't get stuck listening to that one favorite. One of my teachers, I used to love listening to Horowitz play everything. And I'd listen over and over and over again. It may have even been while I was studying the Beethoven we just listened to. And everything in my interpretation was shaped around Horowitz's playing of it. And I remember my teacher telling me over and over again, like, you can't do that. Horowitz can, you can't. And there were 2 underlying reasons for that. And one was that I wasn't in Horowitz's brain, so I didn't have that understanding of how he was feeling connection from one moment to the next moment and to the next moment. And without that understanding, inherent understanding of connection, what I played sounded like a bad imitation instead of like an interpretation. And so my teacher would always work with me on he would regularly tell me to stop listening to recordings or listen to somebody else play it. Because every twist and turn was too modeled after one particular artist. I actually have a couple private students of mine that play some of my original music, and we work on it in lessons. And I love it, and it's awesome. And there's also an unfortunate side to it, because when it's original music of mine, there is only one recording that people can go listen to so far, and that's mine. And that's great. That's how I want the piece to be played. But what ends up happening is the same thing, because there aren't opportunities to listen to a variety of people play it. There's only one interpretation of how the notes are, what comes off the page. And so those couple students of mine that are working on this, they have the same issue, where what I hear in a lesson ends up being a bad imitation. And it's really hard to get across. So what I try to do in a lesson, and when those things happen, is I'll play the music in a couple different ways myself, and I'll let them record it and say, okay, I'm going to play one that's very straight in tempo. Or I'll play something where I take different liberties with dynamic and rubato than what's on my official recording of something, to try to give them a few extra perspectives. Okay, to wrap that up and go back to, I see you had another comment there. So you say, B. Booker, you say, thanks. You fall into imitating sometimes rather than striving to play the written piece. Yeah. I would strongly urge everybody to not play along with a recording by someone else. There are occasions where that can be helpful and it can work and we can learn something from it, but they're really specific moments. So, if you find yourself like, you've learned a particular piece. Oh, Zero's here. Hello. You've learned a particular piece and you like someone's interpretation, and then you try to play along with their recording of it. What ends up happening is your playing becomes a reaction to their playing, and not a reaction to what you're actually doing. And if you remove the recording that you're listening to from the equation, what you're left with is something that sounds really disjointed, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'd urge everybody, if that's something that if you like doing that, limit it like significantly to a short period of time. There might be occasions, for example, like if you're working on, and there are even ways around this today, but I used to do a little bit of it if I was working on a concerto and I wanted to play with an orchestra before the one rehearsal we might get or something. If I wanted to experience the piece that way, I'd put on a recording of the interpretation that most closely aligned with mine, and I'd play along with it. But it was to get the sense of the tonal color that was going to be around me, not to influence how I learned it. And so if there were moments where I was off from the pianist, especially in the solo sections, it didn't matter. I was doing my own thing. Zero. We're going to come back to you in a minute. So I hope you can stick around for a bit, because I'm just going to answer a few more questions that came in, and then we can jump over to your Chopin. So, noteworthy, you said a question on playing emotional music. You say 72 people attending a surprise birthday party for an 85-year-old Air Force vet, and you have to play the Air Force song and then into America the Beautiful. How do you maintain control? Okay, Becky, it's a different swing on a similar answer I've given you before, and that's focus. Stay focused on the act and exactly what you're doing, the notes that you're playing, all of that. We want to stay focused and engaged with what we're doing, because the last thing we want is to have something that's external kind of overwhelm us, especially when we're up in front of people. We don't want that to happen, where then our mind becomes so distracted by the emotion that we cannot go on. I've been in a few circumstances where that has happened. I haven't had that issue in a performance. It's been with collaborative work. And the soloists, a couple times the soloists I was working with were having some really difficult personal things going on in their lives. And some of the music we were performing was the stories that were being told were very closely resembling something they were living through, some kind of painful thing they were living through. And it was one performer just burst into tears in front of the audience mid-phrase after his voice cracked. And he couldn't keep going. He had to walk off stage and come back and regroup. And I think we moved on. We didn't even try to repeat the piece. We didn't finish it. So we don't want that to happen. We have an easier job because we don't have to sing the words. there aren't lyrics, in the pieces that you mentioned, Becky, the Air Force song and America the Beautiful. As beautiful as the words may be, if you don't have to sing them, put them out of your mind. So stay in the moment, stay focused on what you're doing, enjoy the tone that you're making, and just stay present. Note to note to note to note to note, going through it, the entire piece of music, or both in your case. And then when it's all over, or in your last measure or two, you can relax a little bit and you can enjoy that moment maybe a little bit more. You can enjoy the surroundings a little bit more than when you're in the rest of the pieces. Yeah. That's my biggest advice for you. Not to get super depressing, but when I was a church music director, I played a huge number of funerals for people, and I would have to sing them as well. Probably like 50 a year that I would do. And occasionally they would be for people that I had gotten to know pretty well. And the only way through was really, I gave the most emotional performance I could. I played with feeling, but I had to have a barrier between myself and the music and everything else. And I made that through just staying focused, one note at a time, one word at a time. Even singing, I didn't think about the sentence or the phrase I was singing. I didn't think about the meaning behind it because I couldn't. If I did, it would be bad news. So, hope that helps, Becky. Let's see, Iraqi Super. So you've got 2 questions. So let me go through those 2. You say, the first one's toward the beginner level because you started learning 4 months ago. Do you have to worry about making your own interpretation, or can you just copy what great pianists are doing? So yeah, to start off, do you have a teacher you're working with, or are you self-taught? And are you working through this on your own? If you have a teacher, they can definitely help guide you with little things to do to start crafting an interpretation. You say on your own. So if you're on your own, instead of only trying to imitate what you hear from someone else, try to think a little bit more about why does their performance make you feel a certain way? Or why does what they do with a phrase work so well? And how can you define that? Is it about a dynamic? Is it about a sense of time? And can you relate? Can you hear something deeper in their playing? Can you give their playing an emotion, even if it's just a phrase at a time? They can be different emotions, but can we define something that's deeper that's going on other than notes and rhythms? And if we can do that, then instead of imitating timing and imitating dynamic change, which is the simplest way we can talk about being musical, instead of doing that, take that word or that set of words, those adjectives that you found, and start to say, well, okay, if I feel like I want to make this phrase melancholy, how am I going to play it to show that emotion? And what comes out of you might be very similar to what you heard, but it won't be an imitation of what you heard because you'll be creating it from the emotional perspective and not by thinking about dynamic or rubato or matching what someone else has done. So let's see. That was for your first question. So don't just flat out copy someone else, but go a little bit deeper. Use another recording for ideas, absolutely. And then for yourself, try to figure out why it works. And then use that why to influence your own playing. Yeah, no, I hear you with your last comment. So get online, go listen to people online. And if you're playing really, really beginner stuff, there are still recordings of a lot of things that you can work on early that exist online. They might not be like the most phenomenal, great pianists that always record that stuff. But you can find some very, very skilled people playing beginner music because they're usually teaching it themselves. And then for your second question. Oh, okay. In your second question, you had said that you're on your own. So you said you don't have really good teachers in your country, so you're learning online for yourself. And do you have any advice? My biggest tip is stick around on this channel and come back to our streams and watch my beginner content. I have some out there, and even though you're earlier in your study, these streams are always an opportunity to send in what you're playing, and we can always work on it. Always, always, always. So I'm always happy to do that. There are some content creators online on YouTube that I think do a really good job, and there are a lot that I think don't. And I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to do that. But it's very difficult to find a really, really great teacher teaching beginner stuff online. It gets easier as you become a more advanced student. There are more options. Maybe you might be able to look at some channels that exist, like mine. I'll give a few endorsements here. This one is great because it's mine. Denis Zhdanov is a wonderful, wonderful teacher. He doesn't do a lot of truly beginner content. Things that he calls beginner are, for like your 4th, 5th year studying. But you can listen to some of his stuff and see how he talks about music and see how he teaches. Many things that he does are signs of a very, very good teacher. Josh Wright is a very, very good teacher. And he might have a lot more resources because he's been on YouTube for 10 years. Newt Boy, there's another endorsement for Dennis. Yeah. Off the top of my head, those are the other two creators that really stick out to me as being phenomenal. Tone-based piano is great in its own way. A lot of times, because the teachers they have there never work with beginner students, some of the advice that's given could be harmful to students that don't already have a really developed technique. And so it can be a lot of fun to go listen to tone bass. There are interesting things. But if you're a beginner student, it can be really hard to suss out which components that are presented are really good and really valuable and which actually need to be left until you're a more advanced player. Because there are other things that are more foundational that need to be in place first. So I think that's as far as I'll go with those things. Yeah. Nancy, you like Kate Boyd, the piano prof? I don't know if I know Kate's channel. I feel like her name rings a bell, but yeah. Hey, Raj, welcome. So yeah, Iraqi Super. Those are my biggest tips for you. Look for performances on, of the stuff you're working on, even if it's simple and out of a method book. There are probably some pretty well accomplished pianists that are doing things. And yeah, those couple channels I mentioned, those are great places to continue to stay in touch with. Hello, Backwards Fellow. And Bedlington Grimmer. Oh gosh, you asked a hard question. Like, what things should be left for later as after a beginner knows more? Okay, here's an example. There was a short, it was about some Schumann piece of music. I'm not going to pull up, I don't actually know the piece that they were talking about, but I'll pull up some Schumann just to give a demonstration. instead, you know what? I'm going to switch slightly to Schubert. Okay. It's very, very similar in style. Okay, so we've got, this is from Schubert's Opus 90 Impromptus, number 1. I'm jumping into the middle of the piece. So a little bit of how this goes. Yeah. Is that where it goes? Yep. We'll use that as our excerpt. What was being taught on a video was to stay in the keys kind of for an excessive amount of time to get a certain type of tone. A warmer tone. Where we're spending a lot of time, and even the presenter even used the word pushing into the keys, which is just you would never use that word with a beginner, because the last thing we want to develop is the sense that you continue to push. Good piano playing is about a comfortable release, not about pushing in. So you have to have developed, in order to implement the technique that was being shown, you have to know how to play with a comfortable release of the key. And a release doesn't mean the key has to come up. It just means that there's no more effort going into the key, none at all, beyond what is needed to hold the key down. So if I want to play this melody, for example, even though I'm staying in the key for a long time, the moments where I'm not actually playing, I'm not continuing to push. I'm holding, and I'm staying close for a certain type of tone. But what was in their video was something like push through each chord in order to play with a bigger tone or play with a warmer tone. And that would be incredibly detrimental to a beginner that doesn't know that pushing in a musical way and feeling heaviness in the hands does not translate to actively pushing down and holding down on the keys. They don't correlate. So we can stay connected, but even in these moments where I'm holding, there is really little weight in my hand. The weight is all done after I've played the note. So that's one example. Yeah. Oh, and Alexis, you mentioned Greg. I always wonder if I get his name right. Niemczuk. Yeah, his Chopin channel is wonderful. But yes, it would be much more advanced than needed for a beginner. And Newt Boy, I don't know the pianist that you just mentioned. June, great. Oh, Bach Scholar. Oh, okay. And Newt Boy, here's what I'm gonna say, because yeah. If you haven't seen the last video I put on my channel, take a look at it. And there's a little surprise in the middle of the video, maybe 8 minutes in or so. And then I'm going to leave it at that. Nancy, that's interesting. Criteria you use for judging YouTube teachers: if they recommend Hanon uncritically, you pass. That's good. That's good. Hanon is, yeah. Well, we won't go into it on today's stream. Okay, let me jump back here. And I may have missed. Zero, let us know if you're still here or if you were signing off a little bit ago. Okay, I'm trying to catch up on the chat and see. Zero had a question, and we were also, if Zero is still here. Oh, you're still here. Okay. Zero, and I'm also laughing at Raj's last comment. Zero, we're going to take a listen to your Chopin, and let's do that right now, and then we're going to come back and we'll answer as many other questions as we possibly can. I think I got most of them from most of you. But please, whatever I didn't answer, because I know there's a couple I didn't get to. Like June, you asked for a little bit of elaboration on this past week's video. Oh, and Alexis, you're bringing up the same thing. Oh, and B. Booker, yes, recommendation on 3/4 finger exercises to assist with a Gillick etude. And Zero was talking about Tauman. Okay, so many questions. That's great. Zero, I want to be sure that we get to Zero's performance. So we are going to jump to that and take a listen to that. And then I'm going to try to come back and we'll answer these. So when we finish up the next segment with Zero, please drop your questions in the chat again. You can just like copy and paste them if you can, so you don't forget. And I'll get through as many as we can today. Okay. Zero, which let's see, you were playing Chopin's Opus 64, number 2, and we'll call this like a work in progress check-in on the piece. Let me pull it up. There we go. Okay, so we're going to take a listen to Zero playing some of Chopin's Opus 64, number 2, and we'll talk about that quickly. Okay, Zero, good work so far, and thanks for sending in. It's always more than okay, better than okay to send in a work in progress. Really, really wonderful, because then we get to address things before they're too maybe mistakenly practiced. It's easier to correct. Let's give Zero a hand. Just a little round of applause, please. Yeah. It's a little nerve-wracking, even though we're not playing live. It's still nerve-wracking to listen to yourself and to send in. Yeah. Hey, Seth. Clap. One clap from Seth. Okay. Here are a couple things that stood out to me. First of all, you know what? I'm going to say thank you for actually maintaining a steady tempo. Most people that play this don't. I probably wouldn't quite either, but I'm saying thank you because the tempo is given as tempo giusto. There it is. Which means, can somebody fill in, what does tempo giusto mean? Zero especially, if you know. Oh, so much wonderful support. That's great to see from everybody. Thanks for all that applause. Anybody on tempo giusto? Okay, Zero, you say you just played tempo you heard probably, on a recording. Okay, fine. Thank you. Yeah, Becky said unvaried tempo. Donna, welcome, Donna. Exact time. Yes. Literally translated, it is a just tempo. Or you could think of it as, yes, in perfect time, without rubato, without variation. Johan, no vigor. We don't need vigor. So it's interesting because the marking says to not take rubato, yet what you'll often hear from people is... and there's a whole lot of rubato. And that's very common on recording. So anyway, that can be something that you maybe work toward a little bit, but I just wanted to say, Zero, thank you for actually taking a clean and strict tempo, because that does obey the marking. And it's a wonderful place, definitely, to begin. So, okay. First things first, I have the first slur of the piece circled, Zero, because... every time we have a slur, listen for the shape that the melody is making. These aren't three equal notes. They're not bum, bum, right? But we do make a shape where we kind of crescendo or feel like we grow to the high note and then have a little less. That was too much less, but just a little less, so we hear shape. And there isn't quite as much intensity. Every slur, listen for what that shape should be, right? And when we get the next one... Okay, so always, I was playing a variety of phrases. Always listen for shape. Always listen for where something is going and where it's coming back to. Even when it's 2 notes or 3 notes. Maybe easier to do when it's a little bit longer, but definitely at the beginning. Okay, second thing up, Zero, are rhythm in measures like measure 3. Be sure you follow and, let's say, honor the rhythm that's written here, so that we do have a pause followed by a 16th note. What you're playing of this right now is the rhythm is almost even between those 3 pitches, like that. So don't allow that to continue on in your practice. Make a conscious effort to say, the 16th note always leads us across that skip. Okay? Yeah, Rotsi, we never escape Chopin. Welcome, by the way. Okay, let's keep going. So... next thing, Here we go. Measures where we have a dissonance. Pay attention. Listen out for that dissonance. Find out which note actually creates it. So if I start from the first bar in the middle system that's showing, that's not really dissonant. We have a dominant 7 there. But then here, this chord, there is dissonance. There's quite a lot. What is the note? Anybody tell me. What is the note that's causing the majority of that dissonance? No, Rhodesy, not the C. By the way, it's C sharp because of the key signature. Not the C. Alexis, C, the D sharp. Booker said A. Bethany said the sharp one. Calais said the sharp. Yes, where there's an accidental, that's a good thing to take a look for. And yes, it's the D sharp. The D sharp creates the dissonance. Let's listen to it a different way. Okay, if we're in that measure and I only play the upper 3 notes for you, that's very consonant. It's purely an A major chord. So all of that dissonance comes from the lowest note, D sharp. It's fully responsible. Which means we have a great opportunity to, one, just start by being aware that it's there. Don't gloss over the fact that it's there and be anxious to play the next bar, but really listen out for the D sharp. And if you can, it's a wonderful opportunity to voice that note up. Yeah? It's also showing movement descending by 5th, which is really lovely compositionally. So we could absolutely bring that note out. Okay, good. Let's move on for now. I think that's all okay, Zero. Just, be sure that in this segment, you know what fingers you want to use, and you always use the same ones each time. We didn't get to see you play it multiple times. That is a spot where there are many different ways that you could finger that. We could play... some of what I tend to do is a little slide. Let me see if I can... Maybe even on the very top notes. I'm not saying you have to do this, but sliding between some of the black keys and white keys. I like the tone that's generated by that, so I'll choose that. But you don't have to. All I'm saying is be sure that whatever you choose, keep it the same fingers every time. Yeah? I wish I could keep up with all the comments, because it sounds like there's a cool discussion going on. Okay. Next thing. Where we get the repeat of this. So, once again, I circled that one because of the D sharp. But here, the music changes direction from the first time through. There are so many things that you could choose to pay attention to. For example, the voice leading from this. There we go. From this F sharp down to that E sharp, down to E natural. So, and finishing with D sharp. Feels like it finishes. And then to D natural, to C sharp. There's that whole inner line that we could pay attention to. So listen out for that as well. Don't gloss over those stem down notes that are walking down. Zero, you said, can you point out where it's changed? Yeah, let's go back to the beginning. And actually, let's clear everything. Okay, so from the very beginning, we start, and when we get to measure 6, 7, 8, 9, here, we have this G sharp dominant 7 chord. If we look down and we look for this D sharp to QS, here we're going into measure 25. We have the same chord, G sharp dominant 7, right? But the first time, it goes into C sharp minor. C sharp minor in measure 10. In measure 26, it's C sharp major and then becomes C sharp dominant, which then leads us in a whole different direction. Okay. That's an instant place to look out for and say, oh, this can all be played with a different sense of emotion and paying attention to a couple different things. We have all new harmonies. Okay, great. Zero, of course, you already know this, but pay attention to all of those notes that you're struggling with. There were plentiful wrong notes. Some on that first page that we just talked about, and then many more on the next page. So take your time, go slowly, and make sure that we have them all right, and make sure we get them right every single pass through. Zero, you said you're bad at reading music. That's fine. Just take a measure at a time. Don't be in a hurry. You will get there faster if you learn one or two measures really well than if you try to learn a whole bunch, and then we have to go back and undo some bad things that we've learned. Next page. Okay, thanks for putting up with my reading. Through all of this, okay, yes, all the notes that we just talked about, Zero, let's get those right. Let's shift our focus, though, to technique. As you're playing from the beginning of 33 here, there are two technical things that are going to really help you play these passages with a lot more ease. First, let's talk about your fifth finger and your fourth to some degree. They tend to be too flat and a little collapsed, maybe in the last joint, and maybe just in the last joint, and sometimes it feels like in both. Not the big knuckle, but from the second knuckle and our final knuckle. Yeah? Sometimes, especially 5, felt like it was totally collapsed and only supported by our bridge. That's really hard to control if we're playing like that. We have to keep the other two joints engaged, right? So one thing, be mindful that when you play with 5, that there's still a good arch there, a good arch in the hand, and it's not just the bridge supporting us. A good bridge is important, but a good bridge with no rest of support from the finger is going to be very inefficient. So, when 5 plays, be sure that the bridge is strong and the rest of the finger joints are strong as well. That they're, firm. Second part. And this goes a little bit maybe parallel to some Taubman stuff that I saw brought up in the chat. These bars can be made so much easier if you don't try to play them with the fingers extended. And I'll show this from above as well. But right now I'm playing them with the fingers all out and kind of hovering over each. So, showing you from the top, if I'm fully stretched, it feels very secure in that my fingers are always over the right notes. But that's going to be really hard to speed up. And it's actually kind of hard to move the hand down as the passage needs it. So what we need to do is add more movement. It'll feel like it's coming from the wrist, but it's really allowing the forearm and really the whole arm all the way up to be free and let the wrist guide where the arm goes. So what I'm doing here is moving the arm to the right to be behind and in alignment with 5, which will help you keep that finger from collapsing, going back to that first point. And then come back and let the wrist lead to the thumb. And then same thing for 4. So all of these times, I'm not staying, like using that last measure, I'm not staying stretched out and then moving to the next thing. It's move and let the hand return. So even at speed, I'll show you this the other way, because in addition to the lateral movement, there's a little bit of vertical movement as well. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Does that make sense, Zero? You say you are using arm 2. Use more. And focus while you're using the arm. Let the hand relax. So that you could even, another reason to go very slowly in your practice, you could play one note. Whoops. I wanted to show this. One note at a time. And any finger that's not being used is very relaxed. That's what we want to program. And as we speed up, we want to maintain that sense of relaxation. Or just that the hand isn't out like this. That's very hard. Moving with a little arm movement and focusing on letting the fingers that aren't in use relax makes this so much easier to play. And do you have your fingering worked out for that scalar type passage? This. That's another spot. Always use the same ones. I'll write mine. Bedlington Groomer. Perfect correlation. Bedlington Groomer says, well, if that doesn't look exactly like the hand and Faber gestures, absolutely, it is. That's why those are so important. I mean, gosh, yeah. You will continue to use them, so don't... Hannon Faber, we've talked before on the channel. It's not the same as just Hannon. There's a whole lot more, and it's wonderful stuff to learn early on and very relatively simple exercises that you can apply to stuff like this. Okay. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that, Newt boy. Okay. Zero, let me give you my fingering for the last scale passage here. just so you have that to work from, because it seemed like the notes were a little unsure as well. So if you're still working on building the notes up, this is a great opportunity to work on solidifying the fingering that you'd like to use. So let's see, we have to have the thumb on that last E. So then 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. There it is. Now here you'd have a couple different choices. You could continue with a typical chromatic scale fingering, which would be 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, and then I'd use definitely 2, 4 at the end. The one place where that you might choose a different finger. Sometimes I like using 2 on that first one. So the passage becomes 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4. Yeah? Okay. Zero, let's wrap that up here. Okay? Does that sound good? So on that first page, we're talking about watch out for those slurs, watch out for the shape that the music makes. In making those shapes, just listen for them and also learn how you can also make some gestures with the hand and the arm to help show that. So that there's a lot of freedom in the arm. Yes? So we talked about that on page 1. Look out for those dissonances and how those change the color and how they can change the focus musically of what we want to bring out. Watch out for the differences between the first statement of that theme and the second statement of the theme. And there's that whole chromatic descending line that we talked about that happens the second time around. That could be really, really nice to, if you're aware of it, it's probably going to come out of the texture a little more. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So there were many, Newt Boy, you bring up that question. There were many questions I saw about wrist impulses. Yeah, Zero, great job. Great job. We'd love to hear from you again as you continue to work on the piece and get this little more Pumoso. Wonderful. And then we want to hear the next segment too, where it goes into D flat major. Okay. So there, yes, Newt Boy, you bring up the wrist impulses. We can go back and talk about that. There were a number of questions about it. Are those questions, do you just want to go through like another example of using them? Or are there specific questions about, was there something confusing in the video that we can maybe just address head on to help alleviate some of that confusion? So June, you said anything extra from that lesson, like using across slurs with larger note groupings. So you bring up a Burgmüller piece. Okay. Well, let's use that. Okay. Seth, you said, how about Opus 90, number 3 by Schubert? Do you have a question about that, Seth, or do you want to see some wrist impulses applied to that piece? Calais, I answered that question, by the way. I answered that question for sure. I cannot remember who asked me. It may have been Iraqi Super asked about making it our own or listening online. And I did, I think you were here. If you weren't, I did probably like 10 minutes on the topic. Seth, let's look through this Burgmüller piece first that June asked about, and then we can look a little bit at the Schubert. And with the idea of wrist impulses in mind. Okay. Let's think about wrist impulses as a way, you know what, before we get into the music, a bit more general background. Wrist impulses serve a couple purposes, right? We can, if we go back to the tarantella that I showed in the video, they, one, show phrase. They show a drop and a release, which changes the character of the beginning and the final note. And that is not impossible to do with the fingers only, but extremely difficult. It's very hard. It still doesn't have the right character. Yeah. So wrist impulses allow more character to be added to each of our phrases. They also aid in transporting the hand and the fingers around the keyboard. So in that example, when we need to move the hand from this position to that one, from here to here, it's not very big, which makes it a great starting place to use these by using the wrist to pull the hand away. In the act of pulling, we make like a little circle in the air. So we go from one note to the next. So I'm showing it with one finger. That's how the wrist feels. Yeah? And if we show from above, right? Bachwart's fellow, I'm actually going to get into that. You asked, is the wrist impulse part of the circular wrist motion? It is. It is. I didn't go into that in the video because I wanted to simply focus on more mobility in the wrist across short phrases. Okay, so we have the added character. We've got increased movement or ease of movement around the keyboard, and very relaxed releases, especially at the ends of phrases, which is great. Now, if we want to apply that to this Burgmüller piece, the best places to apply exactly what I talked about in the video are going to be down the page where we have shorter slurs. And it's going to be, because we have to hold a finger here, it's going to be a little bit of a different, but we can still feel a drop into 3 and release on 1. But it's going to be a little smaller movement because the hand has more to do. The very last little bits in the piece. Oh, that one. We can still use a wrist impulse, although we have to hold in the duration of the half note. Let me show that. So we could still drop into the first and release the wrist on the last, but not let go of the key. That's also a more advanced use of the technique because we're not allowing the finger to release. We're not allowing the wrist to release as much. but it still provides a difference in color and a difference in phrase. Yeah? Now, when we get into the rest of this, that have much longer slurs, wrist impulses turn into kind of what we were just talking about in the Chopin. This isn't as advanced of a use of them, but playing through, let's see, the first two measures, the way this would actually literally be shown in the Hanon Faber book is with an over wrist circle each time and an over wrist circle. And each one of these has a drop in at the beginning, small. Now, well, let's look at it from the side. So as I play these, there is still wrist movement, but we're not allowing, because the phrase is continuing on, we're not allowing a release of the movement, but we're continuing movement with an over wrist circle, and as we go back to G, and a little under wrist circle that propels us over the top again. Same thing, and then even here, over wrist circle, under. Okay, so longer phrases, we still want wrist movement, but it's less vertical and it's more in circles. Yes. Zero, you mentioned, Chopin Aeolian Harp Etude. That is a very advanced use of this same gesture. Yeah. Think of it like if you can play the Aeolian Harp Etude, you have mastered wrist circles. But they're presented in this very, we'll call it mid to late beginner Burgmüller piece of music. And we're not doing them with the hand stretched. They're in a comfortable place, right? So we can still feel a wrist impulse on the down, and we're still feeling circles which are generated by the down impulse. But then we're not, only when we end a phrase, which would happen here, at the end of measure, that's probably 8, we can end the phrase and show that release and that gentle rounding of the phrase, again, with an upward release of the wrist. Let's open up. So I hope that's helpful. Let me see if there's any difference in looking at the Schubert that Seth brought up. Let's see. So, Seth, you asked about Schubert. Oh, not number 4, number 3. Let's go back. I'm going to say that there isn't a lot that's happening with the wrist in this piece. There is still a little bit. But we need a very quiet technique, and that we don't want to be doing much movement of the wrist and the hand and the arm because of the dynamic and the gentleness we want to convey. So from the top down, you can see as I play the right hand figure, there's still little bits of movement in the wrist and things are still free. but they're all very small. Okay. There aren't going to be big lifts away, and there aren't going to be big drops in, because that'll provide way too much accent, right? Here, this little bit of the phrase in measure 3 has the most wrist movement because of the shape, right, of the notes. So the two of those things that we mentioned about wrist impulse that is really beneficial for them, right? Moving the hand and showing the beginning and an end of a phrase. If you think about the measures in this piece, the hand doesn't need to move from this position. We can use some, we'll call it just wiggle in the wrist, to add some stability behind the thumb when it needs it. But truly, the hand isn't moving around the keyboard. It's staying in one position. So if we use big wrist movements, we're actually going to be doing the wrong thing for this particular phrase. We're also playing, even though the music is divided up into many different slurs, one phrase is about 4 bars long. So the phrase does not end where each slur ends. The phrase starts in measure 1 and continues and continues continues and continues. And even that A natural provides both a bridge to the new phrase and a little bit of an end. But we're creating a very different type of texture. We don't want to show big releases of phrase. We don't want to show... There isn't a breath, really, in the middle of that. The only time that there's a breath is actually on that A natural, which we're going to show with time and not by releasing like that. So Seth, that's a good question. There's still wrist movement. And if you learn about the wrist impulse technique and you learn about wrist circles, that's all still really important, because even though the piece feels stagnant, the hand still isn't. And we want to have built into our technique a natural feeling that things are fluid and that they can continue to be in motion. And we're not even in a piece where the notes are restricted to one particular place on the keyboard. Our hands don't feel restricted. So it's still helpful, but it's not a direct application of that type of technique. Yeah. Good question. Okay. Yeah, so Newt Boy, I see your comment. They are still there. They're just minimized. Yeah, minimized wrist movement. Yeah. Seth, are you working on this piece, Seth? And I know there were some other questions that had come in, but we're going to need to wrap up. Let's see. Yeah, Seth, you say it's a gold piece. Well, very nice. It's a lovely piece of music. I really actually like all of the impromptus in Opus 90. They're really beautiful. Yeah. Nancy, this piece was Schubert's impromptu Opus 90, number 3, from D899. Okay. I do think we're going to wrap up for today. If I didn't get to your question today, my apologies. And if it is a pressing thing and an answer would be really helpful, feel free to email me. I will try to make it a priority to get to those today. So if you've got that question and I didn't have a chance to answer one for you, I even believe my email is in the description of this video. So send me, and apologies for not being able to get to it on the stream today, but I got to wrap up. Thanks to everybody for being here. If you haven't clicked the like button, could you click the like button? And yeah, Newt Boy, it was great to see you. Hope you tune in again. Yeah, wonderful. Antonio, by the way, I loved Anat's piano sound. I thought it was fantastic. We didn't get to talk about that, but it was really, really nice. Okay. All right. B. Booker, also welcome. I don't believe I have seen you in the chat before, so thanks for tuning in. Suzanne, thanks for tuning in. Seth, ETS, welcome, and thanks for tuning in. And June, Calais, of course, everybody, Becky, thanks for being here. And the next live stream it will be in 2 weeks on April 9th. Oh, and one more thing for all of you that are still here. This is a really, really, really exciting thing to share. We won't have a live stream together, but one of my main teachers is flying out here to the studio to film with me in about 3 weeks. And I'm really excited. I don't quite know everything we're going to talk about. So if there are things that you would like to have answers to from not just me, but from him also, send me an email or leave a comment in the comments after this video post, not in the chat, but in the comments section. Yeah, I will look for those and we'll see how many we can fit in. So I don't know when that content will come out, but I'm super excited that he's going to be here in 3 weeks. It's going to be great. All right, everybody. Thanks again. I'll see you on another stream in 2 weeks. And if you haven't seen that Wrist Impulse video that we were kind of talking through, check it out. It just came out on Friday. Practice smarter, not harder. And I'll see you next time. All right, everybody. Take care.